Hello and welcome to Empiresofhistorypodcast Ottomans. I am Frank, your host. I am excited to announce this week's extra episode 6, Land of Myth and Shadows, The Life and Times of Vlad Dracula Part 2, now has a blog post with pictures and further explanations for those who are interested. Moving forward, this blog post will accompany each and every episode that gets released. In writing these episodes, you've heard me say in the past that a whole lot of stuff gets left off on the editing room floor. Well, that whole lot is now going to be these blog posts. It's also my hope that these blog posts will serve as brain fuel for the show's newsletter I have in mind for next year. What I'm thinking is an easy to read, no more than 5 minutes of your time weekly newsletter. It will contain a lessons learned theme and possess actionable items you can implement directly into your daily life. Also, as Empire's podcast The Ottomans evolves and develops, I plan on offering a premium content. But don't worry, the main show will always be free. However, these extras, as well as some other exciting projects I have in mind, will be behind a paywall moving forward. I'm not trying to get rich off this podcast, nor am I trying to quit my day job, and it's not going to happen today or tomorrow. But if I had to add up the books I've bought just this year on the Ottoman Empire, well, I'm already $844 at last count in the hole. This is a passion project of mine, and nobody will be required to pay for anything they don't want. And, as I said before, the main show will always be free. I'll talk more on this later, but I want to throw this out there. If you're interested in getting ahead of the curve, please head on over and shoot me an email at empiresofhistorypodcast@gmail.com. I'll write your name down because I'm trying to assemble a core group of listeners who will get free content in everything I produce moving forward. My very own Janissaries, if you will. For the premium content, you guys will get this for free, and you will serve as a kind of test dummy for me. So, if that interests you, please shoot me an email with your name. And now, let us begin. This extra episode on Vlad Dracula III will follow Dracula's father's tangled course to becoming the voivode of Wallachia, and the young Dracula, along with his brother, first being taken to Edirne as hostages of Sultan Murad II. I've also mentioned previously in Part 1 that when referring to the Dracula family members, I'll be referring to their abbreviated patronymic name, such as Dracula's dad as Vlad II, but when referring to the world's favorite historic vampire as Dracula. When last we left off in Part 1, which if you're jumping in here, there's going to be a link to Part 1 in the show notes, I covered a bit of the backstory to the Order of the Dragon. Not only is the Order of the Dragon important to the military history of the Balkans, but the Catholic Order would have an oversized effect upon the life and destiny of the Dracula family. The first series of consequences of Vlad joining, who, as Dracula's dad, as I said, was that his half-brother, Alexander I, received support from Sultan Murad II. The Ottomans, if you'll recall from previous episodes, were attempting to subjugate Wallachia under Ottoman rule, as they had done in Bulgaria decades previously. Wallachia, however, would prove stubborn, and many military campaigns, especially when John Hunyadi entered the picture, ended in either defeat or stalemate for the Ottoman Empire. One issue was the fractured nature of the region's geography. Bordered by the Danube River to the south, it had a relatively small plain area where most of the commerce and economy was located. But further north, the Carpathian mountain range created an almost inaccessible region, which only permitted small military units the freedom to move about. This meant that besieging fortifications, supplying an army, and moving about was severely restricted from the vantage point of an invading army. Now, from the vantage of the defenders, if a voivode found himself under attack by the Ottomans to the south, he could always position forces around the few places set up to cross the Danube and chokehold any advance. If to his north the Hungarians were attacking, well, there were only a limited number of passes if they were going to invade via Transylvania. This gave the military advantage to the defender in most cases, who, because of the region's geography, had multiple places where the terrain served as a force multiplier. From the Ottoman perspective, the dreaded Akinci warriors had difficulty first crossing the Danube, then, once they accomplished this, their raids, although devastating, were often limited in scope and not as militarily or economically effective as in Hungary. These raids by the Akinci could still carry off men, women, and children, along with precious loot to be sold, and the persons sold as slaves in the Arabic slave markets, but the loot was hard-earned, and the surrounding Christian areas presented much softer targets than the hard stuff that was floating around in Wallachia. The Ottomans had also suffered two massive defeats at the hands of John Hunyadi when they attempted to push into Transylvania from Wallachia. Although they had enjoyed the nominal support of the voivode of Wallachia, the terrain's rough features had caused terrible problems for logistics and supply, which contributed to the Ottoman defeat. From the Hungarian perspective, controlling Wallachia was a must. The Hungarian reasoning went a little like this. First, they needed Transylvania to control the routes which led into Hungary. Then, they would also need Wallachia to control the routes which led, you guessed it, into Transylvania. Their strategy was to create buffer zones around the Kingdom of Hungary, which the Ottomans would first have to penetrate if they were going to get to the kingdom itself. Hence, the Hungarians meddling in the internal affairs of its various neighbors, to include Albania, Serbia, Transylvania, and so on and so forth. Not only was Vlad II still in the Hungarian court, plotting his way to the voivodeship of Wallachia by buddying it up with Hungarian King, but on the sly, he was sending out feelers to the Ottomans as well. Vlad II possessed not only a burning ambition to rule over Wallachia, but it was also a case of personal survival. The longer he stayed in Hungary, then the more tenuous he and his children's position would get. The king could pass away at any moment, and who knew how his successor would feel about the Draculas hanging around court. If Vlad lost his position at the Hungarian court, he and his kids might not have anywhere to go, or worse still, in a high probability, his relatives in Wallachia might have him murdered along with his children, as often the case in these heartless and pitiless politics. So, Vlad II, by reaching out to the Ottomans for support, although a bit hypocritical and confusing to us today, it made sense in the realpolitik of the 2 men enter 1 man leave rule of the day. Vlad II's half-brother Alexander was also gaining the support of the King of Hungary due to his hardline stance against the Ottomans. Each year his support grew and grew until Alexander died unexpectedly in 1436. So not with a bang but a whimper and all of that. King Sigismund summoned Vlad II along with his son Dracula and informed Vlad he would be the next voivode of Wallachia if he promised publicly to stay true to his oath which he had taken as a member of the Order of the Dragon. With Hungarian troops, Vlad soon entered Wallachia and assumed control of the country. Vlad II's situation wasn't secure either. Step 1, seize control of Wallachia. Having been accomplished, Vlad II didn't seem to have a step 2. Rebellions were breaking out due to food shortages, and he was forced to deploy the Hungarian forces to keep things in line. Making matters worse, the Wallachian nobles, called boyars, well, they didn't like Vlad and his son too much. For them, he was a Hungarian puppet who had spent most of his life out of the country. And they vied and competed amongst themselves and plotted against Vlad II, almost as soon as he had entered the country. This division also meant that when Vlad or any other voivode needed to raise an army, and the Wallachians were famous for the horse-mounted warriors, this would prove to be difficult. In 1437, fate would take a turn for the worse for Vlad when King Sigismund of Hungary passed on to his eternal reward. When the king died, the payment keeping the Hungarians, who in turn kept Vlad II in power, stopped, and the troops promptly mutinied and returned to Hungary. Vlad knew that without the troops he and his son was a lost cause, so he immediately sent envoys down to Edirne, hoping to feel the Ottomans out. Or, at the very least, he needed the Akinci raids to stop, and hopefully, maybe, because the situation was so desperate, the Sultan might lend him some troops to help keep the peace. Yikes. I'm sure the spectacle of Ottoman troops on Wallachian lands would go down well with the nobility and the peasants. In 1438, the Ottomans responded positively to Vlad's request. John Hunyadi was proving a worthy opponent, and the Sultan demanded help in the Ottomans' campaign against Hunyadi in return for aid in helping to keep Vlad in power. With Ottoman money and some troops, Vlad managed to hang on to power during the critical year of King Sigismund's death. However, in 1441, Hunyadi defeated a huge Ottoman army in Transylvania, which you can hear about in the extra I did on Hunyadi, link in the show notes below. Hunyadi was enraged at Vlad for having first turned to the Ottomans for help, and then supporting the Ottoman army as they marched through Wallachia to get to his lands in Transylvania. Vlad II tried to reason with Hunyadi, but the warrior wasn't having any of it. Things were now looking, as the Ottomans withdrew their troops from Wallachia, that Hunyadi just might swing south and run Vlad and sons out of town. Word reached Sultan Murad II that Hunyadi might be making a move against Wallachia. Only problem was, from the Ottoman standpoint, they didn't know if Vlad and sons could be trusted. Sure, Vlad II had proved a somewhat loyal vassal when he attacked Transylvania, but that Ottoman army was defeated, and who knew what Vlad would do in the coming years? So, Murad sent messengers up to Wallachia and demanded that the voivode come down to Edirne, along with his two sons, Dracula and Radul, to personally pay the Sultan homage as a public sign of his loyalty. With Hunyadi bearing down on him, Vlad reluctantly agreed, and this would set in motion events in the young Dracula's life that would affect the little dude forever, and not for the good. Arriving in Edirne in 1442, along with his two sons, Vlad II paid public homage to the Sultan. However, Murad was still unsure of Vlad's loyalty, so he decided to separate the father from his sons, and ordered Vlad imprisoned in one of the many forts that surrounded Edirne. He then summoned Dracula and his little bro Radul, so he could size the boys up. Appearing before him was a lanky and pale-skinned 11-year-old boy, Dracula, along with his little brother Radul, who was said to be a little bit darker in complexion, who was only 4 years old at the time. It is said that the Sultan questioned Dracula at length about his father, and especially his father's membership in the Order of the Dragon. And the Sultan impressed upon the boys that he, Murad II, was a kind of spiritual father to the boys. It was from him that they should seek protection. Based on the sources, it seems to have gone down like this: the conversation that Murad had with Dracula and Radul. I'm going to go ahead and let you know that I am adding a bit of creative flourish, but judging by Venetian accounts and Greek accounts, it seemed to have happened like this. To quote Murad in my own little creative way. "Look, boys, I know you are scared, and you should be. We are the Ottomans. We will torture and kill all who stand against us. Where is your dad? Well, he's locked up. You might not ever see him again. Look how powerful I am. I can take your dad away. You need me." Later, in 1442, Sultan Murad and Vlad II had all of them brought before him. Vlad had lost weight and could barely stand from his time in the forts. Murad explained to Vlad that he was to send yearly tribute to the Ottoman Empire. This tribute would be composed of money, material, and most ghastly, Christian boys to be delivered up to the Devshirme slave system. In addition, Vlad was to aid the Ottomans in military campaigns against John Hunyadi. Sultan Murad explained further that he didn't trust the Dracula family whatsoever, due to their connection with the Order of the Dragon. And if Murad had his way, he would have the Draculas publicly renounce the membership of the order. However, he wasn't quite ready to allow Wallachia to provoke the Hungarians, at least not yet. He also let Vlad know that he would be watching him, and if he thought Vlad was attempting to side with the Hungarians, well, Murad was going to come up into Wallachia, and he wouldn't be in a very good mood, and he would also have about 100,000 angry Ottomans. And, Murad added, Dracula and Radul would be staying behind in the Ottoman Empire as hostages to ensure their father's loyalty. This was a pivotal event in the life of Vlad as well as his two children. For Vlad, as well as for me, myself being a father, I can't imagine the wretched bolt of pain and anguish tearing through Vlad's body when he was told by the Sultan that his boys would be staying behind. For all of Vlad's faults, and there were many, he proved to be a rare breed for his day, and that he spent much time with his kids, and he loved them deeply. Part of it was simply their situation growing up in Hungary. Vlad II was without a title or land, so the only people he really had for close company when the lights went out, well, it was little Dracula and Radul. The boys had kept him grounded, and had always kept his focus towards building a better life, not only for himself, but for his children. They were a constant source in the past of strength for him, and now they were being torn, placed into the hands of Sultan Murad II, and then to be subjected to a life of hostageship in the Ottoman Empire, which, unbeknownst to him, would go on for 6 long years. These 6 years would punish, shape, influence, traumatize, strengthen, and grow the boys, most especially Dracula. I've heard the saying that, quote, hurt people, end quote. Well, nothing could describe what was coming on down the pipe for the boys. Vlad II would be forever haunted by the forced separation from him and his children, who, because of circumstances, had always been around them. In part 3 of this Dracula special extra episode, we're going to cover Dracula's time in Ottoman captivity, what life was like for Dracula and his brother, And we're going to get him out of Ottoman captivity as well, and hopefully push him on into his first reign. I thank you for listening, and I would thank you even more if you would consider stopping by Apple Podcast and leaving the show a 5-star review. You can also follow the show on Spotify and leave me a 5-star review on there as well. Thank you, and until next time.